today comes from Psalm 22, and it's David, and he starts off saying, God, why have you abandoned me and forsaken me? And sometimes we feel that way, right? We feel like God has forsaken us, and especially when we have a pain or a problem that seems like God isn't answering our prayers or coming through for us. But David declares something very powerful in verse 3. He says, God is enthroned on the praises of his people. When we talk about enthroned, we're talking about giving God back the authority that he has. And we're talking about our praise bringing God's presence and his authority and his power into our situation. He then goes to say in verse 4, he says, but you were with me even when I was being birthed and my mother was in labor. You're the one that took me and put me on my mother's breast. The Message version says that you were the midwife that assisted in my birthing. I love this picture because he starts to recall God's intimacy in every moment of his life. And there's an influence that God starts to take hold of his heart because he recognizes that God is present in his situation. There's a dependence that he has on God straight from birth that God is teaching him. And I love how then David shifts. He shifts into promise mode, right? He starts to declare promises. He says, the poor will be satisfied. He says, the down and outers will sit at God's table and eat their fill. I love this. Then he declares that we will all be worshipers. He says the powerful will worship. He says the powerless and the forgotten will worship. He says those who've never had it together will worship. And then he ends off by saying, babies not yet conceived will hear the good news that God does what he says. So when you praise, you bring God's presence into your situation. Not just for this generation, but the babies that haven't even been born, you become a legacy of praise and bringing God's presence and enthroning God. So I want to challenge you today in every situation where you feel like you're suffering or God's indifferent or you have a problem, praise, promise, recall his faithfulness from times in past and trust him as his presence comes into your situation and turns things around.